I only trust you because you're the one who helped me to get Band 7 in writing, honestly speaking.
IELTS examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. This episode is all about using comparisons. How to use comparisons in IELTS Writing Task 2 and also IELTS Writing Task 1, the academic one. We're going to go into a little bit of detail, and if you want to get the maximum value from this podcast, I strongly recommend that you take a pen, write it down and write down different notes, write down the examples, and then even compare your notes with the actual blog post. And the blog post will be blog post 124 IELTS podcast. Okay, so just put that into Google, IELTS podcast 124, and then you can start making your comparisons and just check for spellings and stuff like that. Okay, and in the sentence guide course at sentenceguide.com, there's about 5 courses there. There's the reading, there's a speaking course, there's a sentence guide course for IELTS Task 2, and there's also courses for the academic and for the for the general. And you can do the course if you're working hard and fast. You can do it in about 10 days, and that's getting all your essay corrections. You get about 8 essay corrections, and you get feedback on there, so that really pushes you to improve. And you can try the techniques that you're using here, because one thing is just learning the techniques, but the second thing is actually putting them into practice. And that's why there's so many essay corrections included in the actual sentence guide, to make sure that you do actually, that you are actually learning this material and putting it into action and using it. So let's get straight into it. So we can use comparisons basically in 2 different ways. The first one is comparing similar items, and the second one is comparing different or contrasting items. Let's look at the first one, and I'm going to give you plenty of examples, and these are all related to IELTS, so you can write them down and hopefully start using them in your essays and see a big improvement quickly. So the first one, okay, comparing similar items and pointing out the similarities between two or more items. The first way is to express similarities but with different degrees or levels. Okay, so the items share the same characteristics and qualities, but their intensity or the quantity is less or greater than the other. So here we're going to use words such as more, less, better, worse, those are the irregular ones, and words added with the suffix er are also used. So I'll give you some examples. Discrimination against women in economic, social and political aspects of society appears to be more severe in developing countries than it is in wealthier ones. Okay, so we're using the same, it's like the same subject. Discrimination is more in developing countries, or appears to be more in the developing countries than it is in wealthier countries. Okay, so the second one, the integration of technology into our everyday lives has been beneficial to many, but its accessibility is less apparent in the members of the lower class than in those who are members of the high and middle class societies. Different degree of technological integration between the classes of society. Here the key phrase was, but its accessibility is less apparent in the members of the lower class than in those who are members of the higher or middle class societies. Okay, next one. Next example. The development of chemical weapons in some countries are among the growing concerns in the world, but the intensifying effects of global warming is a more pressing issue that the world needs to address urgently. Here, you might be confused into thinking we're comparing two different things, but the main sort of like element of comparison here is growing concern, okay? This is a bigger growing concern than this, okay? Or A is a more growing concern than B. So that's the first way how we can express similarities but with different degrees or different levels, okay? And we're comparing similar items. The second way is to express similarities in a different way but with two sentences. Here the words and phrases similarly are in a similar pattern, okay? So I'll give you an example. Books are a wealth of knowledge. Similarly, the internet is a learner's paradise. It just needs to be used purposely and moderately. Another example would be, men are said to be the strength and protector of mankind. In much the same way, women are deemed as the heart and soul of humanity. So it's two comparisons, okay, and we're just using it in two different sentences. And the first sentence probably going to be a little bit shorter, and then immediately after we're using a phrase such as similarly, or in much the same way, or in a similar way. But the important thing here, it has to be immediately afterwards. And do not worry about using a short sentence with one clause. The key is variety. In fact, shorter sentences are usually clearer and easier to understand, which will help you in your coherence score. However, if you overuse short sentences, then your essays can start to sound a little bit choppy. Anyway, I digress. Let's go on to the next example. In the very early stages of our lives as infants, we are very dependent on others for our every need. In a similar way, when we reach the latter years of adulthood, we lose or weaken our faculties and resume dependency on others. Two different things there, and we've linked it together in a similar way. I'll just go over these phrases again because they're useful, and especially if you're using that structure of a short sentence immediately followed by the comparison in the next one. So these ones would be similarly, in much the same way, and in a similar way. There's also another one which is called in like manner, but it just sounds awkward. So you don't have to use that one. Now, the second way you can give comparisons is by comparing different or contrasting items. And we can do this by pointing out the differences between two or more items. The first one would be comparing with one sentence. The phrases that we will use in these sentences will be while, whereas, however, but, in contrast to, compared with. Okay, and there's a few more, but I would recommend just getting familiar and confident with 2 or 3 of these. And by the way, you need about 2 or 3, possibly more, because you want to avoid repetition. And also, wherever possible, instead of using but, use however. So this is like a more formal version, an academic way. And likewise, with your speaking, it's probably better to use but, because not that many people use however when they speak. I mean, it can be used and it's not totally informal. I guess variety would be the best way. If you keep using however, people might think you're a little bit, yeah. So just a little bit of variety there. Anyway, let's have a look at the examples. Adults deem play as a fun, leisurely activity, comma, whereas, comma, children deem it as a serious business. Okay, deem, D-E-E-M, is think of, okay, or assign. Yeah. So once again, adults deem play only as a fun, leisurely activity, comma, whereas children deem it as a serious business. Okay. There we've put the comparison in the middle of the sentence. The word we're going to use, whereas. Next example. Compared with cameras in Android phones and iPhones, which are lighter and produce relatively good images, SLR cameras are heavier and more complex to use, but they are still more preferred by professional photographers. So here we've started signaling at the beginning of the sentence that we're going to make a comparison. So compared with cameras in, I'm just going to give a simpler version. Compared with cameras in Android phones, SLR cameras are heavier and more complex to use, but they are still more preferred by professional photographers. Okay, so if we were doing IELTS Academic Task 1, we could easily use this sentence and we could say, compared with 1999, sales in 2007 were almost triple that of previous years and actually reached a company record. Okay, or compared with the other sectors in the pie chart, country A has a considerable country A shows a considerable difference to the rest. Okay, that's a very good copy-paste sentence actually. I'll say it again. Compared with sector, I can't remember it now. So compared with the other sectors in the pie charts, country B has considerably more market share, or is considerably more sales, or whatever the unit is, than the other countries. Okay, so just compared with. And in fact, in IELTS Task 1 Academic, you are obliged, if you want to score higher than a 6.5, if you want to go for the 7, 8s and 9s, you have to make comparisons. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Anyway, example number 3. In contrast to the methods used by conventional doctors, comma, non-conventional doctors promote the use of healthy diet and lifestyle and other less painful and less costly ways to fight cancer. Can you see? We've just put in contrast to. And by the way, we don't use these types of sentences to start off our IELTS Task 2 essays. We use them in our body paragraphs. So maybe we've got an essay about helping students with their homework, okay, or parents helping students with their homework. We could just put something like, in contrast to popular belief, or even better, for example, in contrast to popular belief, a recent study by Harvard University showed that parents who did not help their students actually found an increase in exam scores. Okay, so it's just another way of elaborating on giving our examples. So I'll just go over those words again. We've got whereas, which we can use in the middle of the sentence with commas on either side, and then the other two, compared with X, Y is better, for example, or in contrast to X, Y is better. Those are kind of interchangeable. Now, The next one we can do is we can contrast with two sentences. Here we're going to look at kind of like similar phrases, but we're going to look at a very useful one, on the other hand. So when we're using on the other hand, you can, this is optional, but I prefer it. We can start off one sentence by saying on the one hand, or we can start off one paragraph by saying on the one hand, and then later, maybe in the other paragraph, preferably starting our second body paragraph, we say on the other hand. But in this example, we're going to do comparisons with two sentences. So we will start our second sentence immediately after the first one with on the other hand. So I'll give you an example. On the one hand, financial advisors recommend investments in bonds, mutual funds, and FX swaps. On the other hand, businessmen believe that the best investment would often be in private companies. So once again, we're comparing two different items and we're using this construction of on the one hand and on the other hand. Okay, and I would definitely recommend using both of those because usually you're waiting for the other hand, okay? And these are contrasting viewpoints or a contrasting comparison. Next one. Dehydration can cause blurred vision, brain fog, and even high blood pressure. In contrast, being overhydrated causes an imbalance in one's electrolyte levels. So pretty simple, very similar to the other ones. The final one that I want to share is on the contrary. And this one can be used in your introduction quite easily, especially if you're going to do a discursive essay. And it's a good structure and it will help you pick up points because it's a slightly more advanced structure and it shows both sides. So I'll give you an example. Some analysts believe that formal qualifications prepare workers better. Full stop. On the contrary, comma, others believe that there is no substitute for real-world experience. Now, why would I say this is good for the introduction? Because imagine you get a question like the homework one, okay? And we say, I don't know, some students, well, it could even be a question. Actually, the example I give you could easily be a task 2 question. All we need on the end is discuss using examples, give your views and opinions, blah, blah, blah. But imagine we get a question like, academic inflation is a common problem in first world countries. Some experts suggest that academia is no longer a viable route to a prosperous career. Discuss and using examples from your own experience, blah, blah, blah. And then we would just rephrase or paraphrase the question and show the examiner that we've identified that we're going to look at both sides because it's discursive. Show the examiner that we are going to look at both sides and not just take one side. And we're going to show this by using that structure. So we'd say some analysts believe that formal qualifications prepare workers better. On the contrary, others believe that there is no substitute for real-world experience. This essay will look at both issues, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then we can go straight into body paragraphs afterwards. There we go. Those are the 5 different ways we can use the comparisons. And another tip here, once you've actually finished this and you've done, well, first thing I would do, before we get on to talking about exams, first thing I would do is just look at this blog post, go and search for it online, have a look, and you will see all the different sort of like structures. You can test, you can compare what you wrote with the notes in the blog post, and yeah, it's just like exercising. And plus the second review will help you memorize it better because the more times your brain recalls it, the stronger the memory is. So you'll be stimulating your audio memory by listening to the podcast and writing it down, then your visual memory by actually seeing what you've written down, and then maybe a few hours later, or even better, in the next hour or so, you can review it again. And why not write down a few sample sentences and just get this tiny fragment of the IELTS exam under control, and then move on to the next part, which might be something like structuring your essays or how to get ideas. So you just break it down into smaller, tiny sections, dominate each section, control it, and then move on to the next. If you're in a rush, or you need to pass fast, or you just need more assurance that you are going to pass and you don't want to be wasting any more time and just sort of like take a faster route, you can check out the online courses, sentenceguide.com. If you're not there yet, if you don't think you need a course, still suggest you go to IELTS Podcast, sign up to the email list, and you'll get lots of tutorials, and you'll get notified when there's new podcasts coming out as well. Okay, have a great day, and thank you very much for listening. And if you know any students who are studying the IELTS, just tell them, say, hey, why don't you download the IELTS podcast, and instead of listening to music when you go to work, listen to IELTS podcast, and when the next time you take the exam, you'll get a band 9, guaranteed. All right, have a great day, and thank you for listening.